I'm just trying to clean up the courtroom because I see Officer Japar, Hall, McGregor, Schultz, and Rubens. That being the case, nothing else to be heard. The court will indicate that anyone who was scheduled before now who is not here, the show causes, bench warrants will issue for, and the other failures to appear will be set for show cause. I will put those on the record later on. We'll switch the camera so that anyone who's viewing these matters will see the attorneys who are making the arguments. That being said, Ms. Clark, the court will thank you for your extreme patience this morning. We had a pretty busy docket. We're running a little bit behind schedule. This is 220609OD. This is Van Buren Township versus your appearances, please.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Angela Marin on behalf of the people.
And good afternoon, Your Honor. William Mays on behalf of Ms. Clark, who's seated to my left.
State your name for me, please, ma'am. Thank you. These matters were scheduled this morning at 11:30 a.m. for a pretrial and motion hearing. Before we take up Mr. Mays' motion, Ms. Clark, I will place on the record that I'm married to an elected official in Van Buren Township. I make that disclosure as Van Buren Township is the issuing agency. My husband is not involved in the day-to-day operations of the Public Safety Department, does not know this matter is scheduled, and has no impact on the decision I make in this case. Mr. Mays, already being aware of this disclosure now being made on the record. Sir, are you ready to proceed with your motions?
We are.
The court has received the motions and the response from the prosecutor. Mr. Mays, please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. This should actually be argued by the prosecution because it is their burden to establish that there was probable cause for the arrest. But Ms. Manarino and I spoke before the motion hearing. She has suggested that perhaps I should just start with cross-examining the officer. So I will call Officer Fidel to the stand.
Officer Fidel, before you come all the way up, stop at the middle podium, state your first and last name and then spell them for the record.
Andrew Fidel, ANDREWFEDEL.
Raise your right hand for me. Do you swear or affirm testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Dispose of your gun before you sit down, sir. Have a seat in this black chair that's closest to me. Mary Ann is taking down your testimony. If for some reason she's unable to hear you, I'll ask you to either raise your voice or pull the microphone closer, okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Mays.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Officer Fidel, let's start by you stating your name for us, please.
Andrew Fidel.
And you are an officer of the Van Buren Township Police Department.
Correct.
And how long have you been so employed?
3 years.
3 years. And you went to the police academy?
I did.
Before you were employed at Van Buren, were you employed by any other police agencies?
I was not, no.
So this is your first police job after exiting the academy?
Correct.
When did you graduate from the academy?
It was originally April of 2020, but due to COVID, it was pushed back. I believe it was June.
June of 2020?
Correct.
Okay. And have you received any other training or certifications as a police officer?
In general or related to?
In general.
Yes.
What?
Special weapons and tactics.
Okay. Anything else? All right. You were trained in the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration standardized field sobriety tests at the police academy?
Correct.
And that manual that you used was the 2018 manual?
It was.
Okay. In connection with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration standardized field sobriety test battery, you were trained in how to write a police report, correct?
Correct.
There was an entire chapter, maybe two, dedicated to how to write an accurate, objective police report in the NHTSA materials, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You received additional training after you graduated from the academy and joined Van Buren Township on how to write a police report, correct?
Correct.
Were you assigned a field training officer at Van Buren?
Yes.
And who was that field training officer?
I had 4 over my duration.
4?
Correct.
And who were they?
It was Officer, now Sergeant Reaney, Officer, now Sergeant McCormick, and then I had Officer Short for 2 of the phases.
For 2?
Correct. So the same
2 rotations.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So 3 officers.
Correct.
All right. And they also trained you in the Van Buren Township policies and how to write a police report, correct?
Correct.
You have been trained repeatedly on how to write an objective and accurate police report, correct?
Correct.
And you did that in this case, correct?
Correct.
As a matter of fact, this report was reviewed after you had drafted it, correct?
It was.
And this police report that you drafted it shortly after you had processed Ms. Clark, correct?
Correct.
So at that time, everything was still fresh in your memory,
Correct.
and you agree with me that memory fades with time.
Correct.
If you had to write this police report today, your recollection of the events on August 18th, 2022 might not be as clear in your mind or your memory as they were when you wrote this police report, correct?
Correct.
And there was no rush or hurry or anything that required you to write, say, a briefer police report than normal, correct?
There was not.
All right. And you actually did sit down and spend a great deal of time writing out the best, most accurate police report that you could in this instance, correct?
That's correct.
And you were trained in the NHTSA course that you should include all signs and symptoms that support the inference of impairment or intoxication in a police report, correct? For a
Correct.
DUI investigation.
Correct.
And that's more or less reflected in the Van Buren Township Police Department's policies on how to write a police report as well, correct?
Correct.
All right. Did you do that in this instance?
I did, yes.
All right. So everything is in that report.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Is there anything that you want to add, delete, or modify in the police report?
There is not.
You had an opportunity to review the police report before you came here to testify today, correct?
I have.
You knew at the time that you drafted this report that you might actually be called to court and caused to testify, and that you might use this police report to refresh your recollection, correct?
Yes, correct.
And your recollection was in fact refreshed this morning when you reviewed the police report before you testified, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And again, there's nothing that you want to change about this police report at this time?
Correct.
Okay. Anything you want to add to it?
There's not.
Okay. So on August, was it August 18th or August 19th that you stopped Ms. Clark?
That I do not recall.
Okay. Your police report reflects August 18th. My motion indicates August 19th. Do you know which day it was?
I do not recall.
Do you recall what day of the week it was?
I do not.
Was it a Monday or a Sunday or a Friday? Any idea?
I do not recall.
Okay. You might say that there might be increased patrols over the weekend in the summer on a Friday or Saturday, correct?
There is not for us, no.
No? Okay. What time did you stop Ms. Clark? Do you recall?
I believe it was approximately 10 p.m.
All right. Was it still light out?
It was not.
Okay. And you know that because you stopped her for having her brake lights not working, correct?
Tail lights, correct.
Taillights. They were dark, right?
Correct.
Now, you were trained as an officer that there are some 26 different driving behaviors of an impaired motorist, correct? In the
Correct.
NHTSA class?
Correct.
Okay. And you're trained to observe for those that might give you a reasonable inference that the person might be impaired, correct?
Correct.
You can also stop a vehicle for an equipment violation or a registration violation, correct?
That is correct.
And in this instance, the traffic stop is because her taillights were not working, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, after you started to approach her vehicle, she turned right into Atchison Ford, correct? And then drove over that little curb that separates it from French Landing Plaza, correct?
That is correct.
All right. Now, you stopped her there in that parking lot and made personal contact, correct?
That is correct.
That would enter phase one of the DUI investigation, or the DWI investigation, as NHTSA likes to call it, correct?
Correct.
Phase one is where you use your sense of sight, hearing, and smell to ascertain whether or not a person has consumed alcoholic beverages before you made personal contact, right?
Correct.
When you approached Ms. Clark, you did not note any odor of an alcoholic beverage, correct?
I did not know.
You did not notice any slurred speech, correct?
I did not know.
You did not notice any bloodshot or watery eyes, correct? You asked her, though, if she had consumed any alcoholic beverages before personal contact, all right?
Correct, yeah.
And she admitted to you that she had 2 whiskey sour drinks before operating the motor vehicle, correct?
That's correct.
Now, Ms. Clark, you were able to look this up, and it's in your report, I believe, that she weighs 150 pounds, correct?
I did not look that up.
No? All right. You were able to visually estimate her at 150 pounds. Well, I looked through your report to see if you've got this down here. Yes?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you were trained in the NHTSA Standardized Field Sobriety Training course, how alcohol is metabolized by the body, correct?
Yes.
You were trained about absorption, distribution, and elimination of alcohol from the human body, correct?
Correct.
You were trained that in the rudimentary stuff regarding the Widmark equation on how many drinks it takes for a person to become intoxicated, correct?
Correct.
And you also know that each drink is approximately, say, a 0.02 to a 0.03 if they're consumed instantaneously by a person who's 150 pounds, correct?
Correct.
A 150-pound woman, if she drank 2 whiskey sour drinks instantaneously, would produce a maximum BAC of a 0.06, correct?
Using that equation, yes.
Okay. And if those 2 drinks are not consumed instantaneously, but over a reasonable period of time, her expected BAC, that 150-pound woman, would be a 0.035, correct? After some elimination.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So the fact that she admitted to you that she had consumed 2 whiskey sour drinks prior to operating that motor vehicle, you know it's legal to drink and drive, right?
I do, yes.
All right. It's only illegal if you drink too much, right? Okay. Now, you requested that Ms. Clark exit the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Now, there are in your standardized field sobriety training materials, pre-exit interview techniques, correct?
There is.
Produce your license, registration, proof of insurance,
Correct.
doing 2 things simultaneously, asking an unusual question, or performing preliminary exit tests such as the alphabet counting backwards or finger count, correct?
Correct.
These are all things that are designed to decide whether or not the person is adequately able to divide his or her attention, correct?
That's correct.
And the divided attention tasks are emphasized throughout your NHTSA training course because an impaired person has difficulty doing 2 things at once, correct?
Correct.
You did not engage in any divided attention tasks before you asked her to exit the vehicle, correct?
That is correct.
You did not engage in any of those pre-exit interview techniques such as the alphabet finger count or counting backwards, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. The exit, you're allowed to force, essentially, a motorist to exit a vehicle under Pennsylvania versus VIMS, right?
Correct.
To ensure officer safety, to ensure that the motorist doesn't have a weapon that might pose a danger to you, right?
Yes.
So Ms. Clark had no option but to exit the vehicle at that time when you, quote unquote, asked her to exit the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, she did exit the vehicle, correct?
She did.
She was not a sovereign citizen, refusing to get out, right? No. Okay. You were trained in the NHTSA Standardized Field Sobriety Test Battery, though, that the exit sequence is an important aspect of the DWI investigation, correct?
It is.
An impaired motorist may show an unusual or an angry reaction when you ask them to exit the vehicle, correct?
Potentially, yes.
The impaired motorist may fumble or have difficulty with the motor vehicle controls, like, I don't know, rolling down their back window or fumbling with the door handle or something like that, correct?
Correct.
An impaired motorist may actually get angry with you when they're asked to exit, right?
Correct.
An impaired motorist might leave their seatbelt on, correct?
Yes.
An impaired motorist may have to pull themselves out of the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
And an impaired motorist might have to lean against the vehicle for support, correct?
That is correct.
Each one of these questions that I've just asked you is a bullet point in your NHTSA training materials where they trained you, this is what you're supposed to look for at the exit, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you notice none of these behaviors exhibited by Ms. Clark, correct?
That is correct.
She exited the vehicle consistent with that of a sober person, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So at that point, you have no signs of impairment during the exit sequence, correct?
That is correct.
And you have no signs of impairment during the personal contact phase, correct?
Correct.
All right, so phase 1 at that point, when you ask the person to exit, that concludes phase 1, correct?
Yes,
That's where it ends and you go into phase 2, correct?
correct.
Or actually, I'm sorry, phase 1 is vehicle in motion. Phase 2, personal contact. I misspoke, I apologize. That concludes phase 2 though, right?
It does, yes.
So you elected to have her perform field sobriety tests, correct?
Correct.
Now, you were trained that these tests were developed in 1977 initially, correct?
Yes,
You were trained that the HGN test back in 1977 was called the all-call gaze nystagmus, correct?
correct.
It was a wholly different test that was conducted back in the 1970s than what you're currently trained to do for HGN, correct?
Yes,
The HGN test you were trained in the NHTSA materials was developed somewhere around 1983 or so with some of the additional validation studies, correct?
correct.
And then fast forward, you have the 1998 San Diego study, along with Colorado and Florida, that produce statistical reliability or relevance of these tests, correct?
Yes,
The purpose of these tests is to ascertain whether or not a motorist is at or above the legal limit, correct?
that is correct.
These tests also suffer from real problems with statistical reliability, though, don't they?
Potentially.
Potentially, you could make false determinations just based upon the raw numbers that are provided, for example, in the San Diego study, correct?
Correct.
And the HGN test, when improperly conducted according to the robustness study, can produce error rates upwards of 90%, correct?
I'm unfamiliar with that.
Okay, all right. You are required to properly conduct these tests, correct?
That's correct.
Now, you have obviously 3 years or 4 years maybe of training, knowledge, and experience, correct?
Correct.
But you don't claim to be an expert in these field sobriety tests, do you?
I do not.
You're an officer and you're required to follow the NHTSA protocols, correct?
That is correct.
And you were warned in the NHTSA training course that if you don't conduct these tests in accordance with the standardized prescribed method, using the standardized criteria to score the performance, that the statistical reliability is, I believe in their words, compromised, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, when you conduct the HGN test, that is a scientific test, correct?
It is, yes.
What you're looking for essentially is a type of jerking in the eyes, correct?
That's correct.
Everyone has nystagmus, correct?
No.
Everyone has nystagmus to some degree. Correct?
I'm unaware of that.
All right. Hold on just a second. Nystagmus occurs naturally and is always present, correct? Well, let's walk through the test. Do you recall how the HGN test is, how you medically qualify somebody to do the HGN test?
I do, yes.
And what are those 3 things that you do to medically qualify a person before you administer the test?
Checking for eyeglasses.
I'm sorry.
Checking for eyeglasses. I cannot recall the other 2.
Okay, all right. If you do not medically qualify somebody to perform the HGN test before conducting the test, your results, you haven't medically qualified a person, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you do not remember at this time what the 3 things are that you do to medically qualify somebody to perform the HGN test on them, correct?
I do not.
Okay, all right. You raised your finger in front of Ms. Clark's face.
Correct.
And held it away from her face a certain distance. Do you recall what that distance was?
The manual states 12 to 15 inches.
Did you do 12 to 15 inches?
I do not recall.
Okay, all right. If you're too close or too far, that's one of those things that's talked about in the robustness study. If you know, yes?
Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with the study.
Okay. You are required to follow the instructions that are given to you in the NHTSA manual by holding the stimulus at 12 to 15 inches slightly above eye level, correct?
Yes.
And then you're required to move the stimulus in a certain prescribed fashion, correct?
Correct.
If you do not move the stimulus at the certain prescribed fashion that's advocated by the NHTSA materials, you may induce nystagmus, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You were also warned to turn off your overhead lights on your car because that can also induce nystagmus, correct?
Correct.
Did you turn off your lights before conducting this test?
I normally practice that I do, but I do not recall this.
Okay, that's called optokinetic nystagmus, correct?
I'm unfamiliar with the terminology, but
Optokinetic, you don't remember that?
I do not.
Would looking at your training materials refresh your memory?
It would, yes.
May I approach you?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Awesome. That was really expensive to print. Take a look at the first page. That's the 2018 DWI Detection and Standardized Field Sobriety Testing Participant Manual, correct?
It is, yes.
All right. Sorry, Judge.
No, you're not.
I'm floundering here in session 7. If you want to turn to that, session 7. Oh, no, I'm sorry, session 8. I lied. Page 21 of 95 in session 8. You see optokinetic nystagmus on that page?
I do, yes.
And does that refresh your recollection now?
It does, yes.
Okay. So you can induce nystagmus merely by having your overhead lights on, right?
Correct.
All right. Now, as I was talking about earlier about medically qualifying a person before you conduct the test, you're required to make 2 complete passes before you even begin the evaluation doing the actual HGN test, correct?
Correct.
And that is to check for equal tracking, correct?
Correct.
In order to look for equal tracking, you have to look at both subjects' eyes to ensure that they track equally, correct?
That is correct.
That's one of the medical procedures that you have to do before you begin the HGN test, correct?
Correct.
The second one is to ensure that the eyes are equal in size, the pupils, correct?
Correct.
In your NHTSA training materials, they describe like a quarter versus a dime, correct?
Yes.
A larger coin versus a smaller coin. If you see unequal pupil size in a subject's eye, unequal pupil size in the subject's eyes, they're not medically qualified to perform the HGN test, correct? Correct. And you're also required to look for resting nystagmus, correct?
Yes.
Resting nystagmus is when the eyes just simply quiver while the person is looking at you, correct?
Yes.
So these are the 3 medical things that you're required to do before you even conduct the HGN test, correct?
Correct.
But you did not remember these until I refreshed your recollection by asking these questions, correct?
That is correct.
All right. Now, once you begin the HGN test, you're required to move the stimulus in the standardized prescribed fashion using the times that are detailed for you in the NHTSA training materials, correct?
That is correct.
And this is what's going to differentiate HGN from AGN from all other types of nystagmus testing tests, correct?
Correct.
All right. If you don't move the stimulus the right way, it really isn't the HGN test at all, is it?
That's correct.
All right. Do you recall at what rate of speed you're supposed to look for the first clue?
It is 2 seconds from center to side.
All right. And what's that first thing that you're looking for? Do you recall?
The lack of smooth pursuit.
The lack of smooth pursuit. That's right. You move the stimulus out 2 seconds out and 2 seconds back, correct?
That's correct.
And then you check the other eye 2 seconds out and 2 seconds back to center, correct?
Correct.
All right, and then you repeat that procedure, correct?
You do, yes.
So that's 2, 4, 6, 8 times 2 is 16 seconds just to perform the very first stage of the HGN test, correct?
Correct.
And then what's the second thing you look for?
You'll
What's the second clue?
the nystagmus prior to the onset of 45 degrees.
Are you sure on that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall how you checked for the onset prior to 45 degrees?
Yes.
How?
So it's the same motion, using a stimulus and then moving out. Should take you 4 seconds, approximately 4 seconds to reach that 45-degree angle.
And where is that 45-degree angle at?
More or less of an estimation.
Well, let's say that you were 15 inches away from Ms. Clark's face, hypothetically speaking. How far would the stimulus have to move over? Okay. Well, how far did you move the stimulus?
Mr.
over?
Mays, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
They'll be on Marion's desk, they're not in it, so somebody else is. They will do this vote. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mays.
No problem, Judge. If you would turn to session 8, page 55. You were actually required to practice on a 45-degree template how to estimate the 45-degree angle, correct?
I do not recall.
We'll take a look at those pages. Does it refresh your recollection? They've given you a 45-degree template, correct?
Yes.
And then there's participant practice, where they will coach and critique your practicing of the 45-degree angle, correct?
That is correct.
Now, you're not a carpenter, are you?
I'm not.
All right, if you're 12 inches away from the face, 12 inches over is 45 degrees. It's a square, right?
Correct.
If you're 15 inches away, it's 15 inches over, right? Think of a carpenter, think of a square.
Yes.
And if you're 18 inches away, it's 18 inches over, correct?
That's correct.
All right. But you didn't know that at the time you conducted this test on Ms. Clark, correct?
Correct.
You'll never forget it now, though, will you?
I will not.
What's that?
I will not.
Okay. So, now you said that you move it over at a rate that takes approximately 4 seconds to reach the 45-degree mark, but you don't recall exactly how to measure the 45-degree angle in Ms. Clark's case, correct?
Correct.
All right. And then you're required to check the other eye, right?
Yes.
And then you're required to repeat that process, correct?
Yes.
So that's 4, 4, plus another 4, plus another 4. So that's another 16, correct?
It is. Yes.
But it actually takes a little bit longer to do that, because once you reach that 45-degree mark, if you see nystagmus, you're required to stop and verify that the nystagmus is actually present, correct?
That is correct.
So it would actually be about 6 seconds for each eye times 2, right?
Correct.
So 24 seconds just to check for the onset prior to 45 degrees, correct?
Yes.
Now, when I was asking you earlier what the second clue is that you're looking for, isn't it true that actually the second thing after lack of smooth pursuit is distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation?
I do not recall.
Okay. You can turn back on session 8 to session 8, page 32. You see lack of smooth pursuit, distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation, and then onset of nystagmus prior to 45 degrees.
I do, yes.
Okay, that's the order in which you're supposed to do these things, correct?
Correct.
Now on page 33, it says that these 10 steps are to be done the systematic administration of the HGN, correct?
Yes.
Now, you were never trained in HGN outside of the police training for this HGN test, correct?
Correct.
You're not medically trained, in other words. And it's nothing that, you don't use this as any other field or capacity, correct?
I do not.
Your sole and authoritative source for the HGN test is contained in this training course, correct?
Yes.
And so let's talk about the passes that you're required to take, and the times that you're required to engage in this test. You did this entire test in 4 passes, correct?
I do not recall the number of passes.
Okay. You're required to do a minimum of 14 lateral passes, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Would watching the video refresh your recollection on how many passes you made?
It would, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Mays, how do you intend to show this
Well, I'm
video?
just gonna hand it to him.
And for Ms. Manarino, myself, or anyone else is interested in
I
the
don't think
video?
that we need to see it. I mean, if you want, we could, but it's just to refresh his recollection.
I asked because Officer Brooks was turning on the screen, because we allow attorneys to connect their devices so that everybody can see it. But if it's your intention to approach Officer Vidal and show him what it is that you have, can't imagine that Ms. Manarino has any objection.
No.
May I approach?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Is that you in that video? Conducting those tests like this one?
It is, yes.
You grew a mustache since then?
I did, yes.
Okay, it's cool.
Your question, sir?
He's watching the HGN, Judge, to see if it was 4 passes.
Thought we had another mustache question.
Oh, no.
We started off at 8 o'clock with
Did
a
you see
mustache
that they
question.
retrieved my twin in Dallas the other day?
I'm sorry?
They found my twin living in an abandoned building after he'd escaped from the Dallas Zoo.
Ms. Clark is
He's
like,
got
this
this
is not.
beautiful mustache. I'll show you after court.
No, I'm good, thank you.
You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about now.
There's been enough mustaches today.
What's that?
There's been enough.
The 2 missing monkeys. Oh, that beeping would
Are you
drive
watching
me
the test
crazy.
being done?
Yes,
All right,
It's
4
beeping.
lateral passes?
that's correct.
All right, thank you very much. And so we've got a couple of passes for medically qualifying the person to see that there is equal tracking, right?
Correct.
And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 for lack of smooth pursuit, right?
Yes,
1, 2, 3, 4 for distinct and sustained nystagmus at maximum deviation, right?
yes.
And then 1, 2, 3, 4 for onset prior to 45 degrees, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now, your knowledge, training, and experience regarding the HGN test is that you were required to do it this way, right?
Correct.
You can't detect, for example, the lack of smooth pursuit and distinct nystagmus at maximum deviation and the onset prior to 45 degree in any other way than doing it this way, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, after the HGN test, I might go back to that just a little bit further, but let's move on to you would agree with me that everyone, including police officers, have their own background, their own biases, and their own prejudices, correct?
That's correct.
We have to carefully guard, and you may have even been trained in de-escalation techniques, where they teach you to reconsider some of your inherent biases, correct?
Yes.
Now, and I guess that the easier way of saying it is that what the mind believes, the eyes will see and the ears will hear, correct?
Yes.
Okay. When you're looking at a person and conducting the HGN test, if you want to believe that the person is impaired by alcohol, you might see something that is objectively not true, correct?
Yes.
Okay. You instruct, you try and do your best to set aside the biases and the prejudices that you might have that are inherent, correct?
I do.
Okay. Now, you had Ms. Clark perform the finger count test next, correct? After the HGN.
I believe yes.
The finger count is not an actual field sobriety test, correct?
Correct.
It is not a validated standardized field sobriety test, correct?
It is not.
It qualifies in the NHTSA materials as an additional technique, correct?
Yes.
And again, we discussed that earlier. That's a pre-exit interview technique, correct?
Yes.
Your NHTSA training instructed you that these techniques are not as reliable as the standardized field sobriety test, but they can be useful for obtaining evidence of impairment. These techniques do not replace the SFSTs, correct?
Correct.
And when it says these techniques do not replace the SFSTs in your training materials, that was all capped, right?
I do not recall.
Okay.
that.
Now, understanding that you might have inherent biases or prejudices or something like that, using your best judgment on this particular night that you were interviewing Ms. Clark, using your best training and experience, you admit that Ms. Clark passed the finger test. Correct?
The finger dexterity?
The finger dexterity, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You then asked her to recite the alphabet, and just like the finger count, this is also not a standard test, correct?
It is not.
It is one of those additional techniques detailed in the NHTSA manual, correct?
Correct.
And the way that they have it laid out in the NHTSA manual, you ask a portion of the alphabet, correct?
Correct. Because
Because that is an unusual question to ask a person to do just a portion of the alphabet. Correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So you instructed her to recite the alphabet from D as in Delta and ending in Q as in whatever Q is under the military alphabet. What is Q in the military or police?
Queen.
Queen?
Correct.
Okay. So Delta the Queen. And what you're looking to see is if a person can recite their alphabet, if they mix up letters, if they leave out letters, skip letters, or simply can't even do the test, right?
Correct.
And you have seen that, correct?
I have it.
Where a person goes A, B, C, and they can't say anything else. And it's just bizarre, isn't it?
It is.
Okay. In this instance, Ms. Clark recited her alphabet from D and went all the way to Z, correct?
That is correct.
And then she paused after saying that, made some sort of, she offered to repeat the test, correct?
I do not recall
You don't? Would watching the video refresh your recollection?
it. It would, yes.
Okay. Oops. Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
She did offer to recite it again, correct?
She did.
Which implies that she knew that she was supposed to stop at Q. Oops, I went all the way to the end, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, that's, it assumes things that weren't what she said.
Well, she offered to repeat the test. We can agree on that, yes?
Hold on, officer.
I'll stipulate to, her objection. But we can agree that she offered to repeat the test.
She
right?
did, yes.
Okay, for whatever reason.
Correct.
Okay. Now, that is not that performance of that evaluation. She didn't miss any letters, correct?
Correct.
There was no slurred speech, correct?
There was none.
There was no singing. You tell them not to sing, correct?
That is
She
correct.
didn't sing. She didn't miss any letters or jumble them up and she was obviously able to complete the evaluation, correct?
She was.
All right. You then had her perform the one leg stand, correct?
Correct.
The one leg stand requires a motorist to put their feet together, arms at their sides, and raise either foot approximately 6 inches off the ground, keeping that foot level with the ground, correct?
That is correct.
And you're looking for there are standardized instructions that you use, correct?
There is.
And there's a standardized criteria on how to measure that performance, the subject's performance, right?
There is.
Okay. Using your training and experience and using your best judgment, despite any suspicions that you might have had or potential biases that you might have had, you agree with me that Ms. Clark passed the one leg stand without exhibiting any clues, correct?
Correct.
Her performance of that test was flawless, correct?
She performed it as a
Okay. Now, that is a standardized field sobriety test, correct?
It is.
All right. You next had Ms. Clark perform the walk and turn test, correct?
Correct.
And that is, like the one leg stand and the HGN, a validated field sobriety test, correct?
It is.
This requires a motorist to put their foot on a line, whether it's real or imaginary, put their right foot touching the heel or the heel to the toe of their left foot, and then standing there with their arms down at their sides while you read them instructions, correct?
That is correct.
You instruct the motorist or subject at that point that do not move from this position until I've instructed you to begin the test, right?
Yes.
When you tell the person, when I tell you to begin, I want you to take a series of 9 heel-to-toe steps. I will demonstrate 3. 1, 2, 3. And you'll demonstrate those 3 steps. At the end of your 9th step, I want you to take a series of small steps, keeping your lead foot planted and then returning the 9 heel-to-toe steps. While conducting this evaluation, I want your arms at your sides at all times. I want you to look at your toe and I want you to count your steps out loud. Starting off by counting the first step as 1. Do you understand these instructions, right?
Correct.
So this is not just walk heel to toe, correct? This is a pretty complicated test, right?
Correct.
And there are a total of 18 steps, plus the turn, plus starting too soon and raising the arms for balance, or stopping while walking. All of these things are clues, right?
Yes.
So a person can fail this test left, right, or indifferent. Easy, right?
Correct.
Okay. This, as well as the one leg stand, are both divided attention tasks, correct?
They are. Yes.
And you were trained in the NHTSA materials that alcohol will affect the mind before it affects the fine motor coordination skills, like being able to paint Picasso or something like that. And that alcohol will then affect those fine motor coordination skills before it affects the gross motor coordination skills, correct?
Correct.
So gross motor coordination skills being just the ability to walk or stand up or something like that. And you've seen people that are drunk like that, right?
Yes.
Where they can't stand up and they're just sloppy, right?
Correct.
But these tests, the one leg stand and the walk and turn, they divide a person's attention and require them to focus on your instructions and then to do these physical tasks in connection with that, right?
Yes.
Fair to say that it is a little bit demanding if a person has never done the walk and turn ever before to understand all of those instructions, right?
Yes.
At the conclusion of the instructions, you say, do you understand how to do this test? Do you have any questions before you begin this test, right?
Correct.
No, I don't. All right, you can start counting your first step as 1. 9 steps down, turn, 9 steps back, right?
Yes.
using your training and experience and your knowledge and using your best judgment despite any suspicions or potential biases, you would agree with me that Ms. Clark flawlessly performed the walk and turn, correct?
She did, yes.
At that point, you requested that Ms. Clark submit to a preliminary breath test, correct?
That is correct.
The preliminary breath test, you have to be a Class 1 certified officer before you can conduct a PBT, correct?
Correct.
Are you a Class 1 certified PBT operator?
I'm unaware.
You don't know?
I do not.
Okay. Requires you to go to a class on how to administer a preliminary breath test, correct?
I'm unfamiliar with it.
You didn't go to a class for the preliminary breath test?
I did not.
No? Okay. All right, fair enough. Had you been trained, they would have trained you that you have to ensure that a person does not eat, drink, smoke, or regurgitate or place anything in their mouth other than the tube to the preliminary breath test instrument before administering the PBT, correct?
Correct.
This is designed to ensure the accuracy of those preliminary breath tests, correct?
Yes.
In the NHTSA manual, they even talk about the limitations of a preliminary breath test device, correct?
Yes.
And a preliminary breath test, if a person is eating, drinking, smoking, regurgitating, or placing anything in their mouth other than the tube, may compromise the validity of the test, right?
It could.
And the problem with a roadside PBT is that if a person has drank alcohol just shortly before you had contact with them, they can blow crazy high numbers, correct?
Yes.
If you take a sip of beer and spit it out, don't even drink it, and then blow into a PBT 5-10 minutes later, you will have numbers up in the 20s and the 30s, correct?
Yes.
And likewise, they say in the NHTSA manual that smoking can produce artificially high results, correct?
Yes.
Now, you are not required to actually observe a person for 15 minutes before administering the preliminary breath test, correct? That's a data master where you have to actually observe, right?
Yes.
Preliminary breath test rules are a little bit more relaxed, correct?
Correct.
You are only required to reasonably ensure that a person does not ate, drink, smoke, regurgitate, or place anything in their mouth, right?
Correct.
And you can do that simply by asking, Ms. Clark, when's the last time you ate, drank, smoked, regurgitated, or placed anything in your mouth? And if she says longer than 15 minutes ago, Officer Fidel, you're good to go, right?
Yes.
All right. You did not do that in this instance, correct?
I do not recall.
Well, the time, you conducted the PBT at 11 minutes and 32 seconds, correct?
I do not recall the exact time.
You want to watch the video? There you go. You can play it. Your option. See her doing the PBT there?
Yes.
The time in terms of the body camera time, not body camera time, but the, it notes down here that it's at 12 minutes and 30 seconds. Well, it's a little bit before that. 12:12, 12:13 on the body camera in terms of the recorded footage, right?
Correct.
And we go back here. You made personal contact 50 seconds in, correct?
Correct.
All right. So we do that math, 12:10 minus 50 seconds, you conducted the PBT at 11 minutes and 32 seconds, correct?
Correct.
All right. You did not ask for the requisite questions regarding when the last time she ate, drank, smoked, or did place anything in her mouth, correct?
I did not.
And she did actually have cigarettes in the car, correct? You did an inventory search, right? Or did you not?
I did. I don't recall if I did it or another officer.
You did not tell Ms. Clark that eating, drinking, smoking, or placing anything in her mouth might compromise the preliminary breath test, correct?
Correct.
You did not warn her that drinking, smoking, belching, or anything else like that might inadvertently cause a higher than accurate preliminary breath test result, correct?
I did not.
And in terms of the weight that you might give, let's talk about the HGN and the PBT. You are not an expert witness, as we discussed earlier, correct?
Correct.
You would not be able to tell us what weight to ascribe to an improperly conducted HGN test, correct?
Correct.
You would not be able to tell us what weight we should give to an improperly conducted preliminary breath test, correct?
That is correct.
All right. No further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Manarino.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Fidel, I want to go back to the initial stop. When Ms. Clark pulled into the driveway at Atkinson Court, was the dealership closed at that time?
It was.
And then once she pulled into Atkinson to access French Landing, I understand that she drove over a curb?
Correct. It's approximately 2 foot wide with 2 curves that divides the 2 parking lots.
And that separates the parking lot of the dealership from the parking lot of the liquor store?
It does, yes.
Other than Ms. Clark's statement that she had 2 drinks, do you have any knowledge as to how much alcohol she actually consumed on that date August?
I do not.
So as to the questions that Mr. Mays was asking you a few moments ago, as it relates to what you would expect her blood alcohol to be, you don't know what the starting point is as for the amount and time of alcohol that she consumed.
Correct.
Before you asked Ms. Clark to exit the vehicle to do this field sobriety test, was there anything about your observations of her that caused you to believe that she could be impaired?
Yes.
What was that?
The admittance of consuming alcohol, and then when asked for driver's license, I believe there she went through a stack of cards, if I remember correctly.
So she didn't seem to know where her license was located promptly upon you asking her for it.
Correct.
When you asked her to perform the finger dexterity test, was there anything that she did in that test that was not in accordance with how you had instructed her to perform it?
I do not recall.
Is that something you would have documented in your report?
It is, yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm handing you the portion of your report that reflects the performance of your notes on the field sobriety test. Do you see that?
Yes.
Upon reviewing that report, does it refresh your recollection as to the finger dexterity test and Ms. Clark's performance?
It does, yes.
And was there anything in her performance of the test that was not in accordance with your instructions?
Yes, failing to count all out.
And I believe we went over this when Mr. Mace was asking the questions, but when Ms. Clark performed the alphabet test and was supposed to count her, say the alphabet from D to Q, and she went from D to Z, did she say anything to you that indicated that she understood that she was not performing that test In fact, the only thing she did say was that she asked if you wanted to perform the test again.
Correct.
After you administered the field sobriety test and based on your interaction with Ms. Clark, you didn't get to arrest her for operating on oxygen, is that correct?
I did, yeah.
And what was the probable cause upon which that arrest decision arrested?
The horizontal gaze nystagmus driving behavior.
Other than those two pieces, was there anything else that played into your determination that you had probable cause at that juncture to arrest Ms. Clark?
There was not.
Did the manner in which she was driving play into your probable cause determination at all?
It did, yeah.
Did the fact that she had admitted to you that she consumed alcohol early in that evening, was that a factor in you assessing the probable cause?
It was, yeah.
I have nothing further on.
Thank you. Any redirect, Mr. Mays?
Just very briefly, Officer Fidel, on the finger count, there are no standard instructions for that because it's not a standard test, correct?
It is not.
Okay. You did not instruct her to count out loud, did you?
I did not recall.
You want to watch the video?
Yes.
Yeah. This one's a little longer. I think it's queued up and you just have to hit the button.
I'll tell you when it began. It's gonna look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so one sequence will look like this. I'm gonna show you. Let me show you. You're not starting yet, okay? So just watch one sequence, all right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's a complete sequence. So you'll do 3 total. Do you understand that? Okay, so whenever you're ready, whatever hand you choose, you may begin, okay?
Okay, you did not explicitly instruct her that you are required to count this out loud, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. On the walk and turn, by comparison, when you gave her the standardized instructions, there are standard instructions for that test, right?
There is.
And like we talked about earlier, you tell the subject, it's Ms. Clark or somebody else, you may begin counting your first step as 1. And you tell them earlier in the instructions, count your steps aloud, correct?
Correct.
All right, but you did not do that for this finger count, correct?
That is correct.
And in terms of trying to find the driver's license, you're not suggesting that she was fumbling for her driver's license. There was a big old stack of credit cards that she had to go through, and then she went to another place to look for the license, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you were specifically trained to look for fumbling fingers while retrieving a driver's license, not that a person is just disorganized or has a lot of cards, right?
Correct.
All right, thank you, sir. No further questions, Judge.
I have nothing else to do, Officer, Your Honor.
Officer Fidel, thank you for your testimony. You may step down. Your next witness, Mr. Mays.
No further witnesses, Your Honor.
Any witnesses, Ms. Manorino?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Argument, Mr. Mays.
Your Honor, I think that the motions themselves speak for themselves, and that I've given you enough arguments in there to dismiss this based on probable cause, but we're also moving to suppress the breath test after the arrest, or the chemical test after the arrest, because of Secretary of State versus Gallagher, where that arrest that you make as an officer, the sine qua non of instructing a motorist on chemical test rates is that arrest. And the sine qua non of it is a valid arrest. And I've struggled with this over the years, but there's a number of Michigan cases out there that talk about how the implied consent law, the chemical test rates in Michigan's implied consent law, offer a motorist a Hobbesian choice as to whether they're going to submit to it or refuse it. You know, you're going to lose your license for a year, 6 points to be added to your license, etc. if you don't submit. So we place a check on that though by saying what energizes the implied consent statute is a prior valid arrest in Delaware. If we don't have that prior valid arrest, then the motorist is improperly subjected to that implied consent Hobbesian choice, in other words. There's always the alternative of going and getting a warrant. We can search people's blood. We can do that with a warrant. But in the absence of a warrant, what triggers the implied consent statute is a valid arrest. So we're moving to suppress the chemical test because there was no valid arrest. The arrest on the totality of circumstances, probable cause was lacking. Now, the people in this instance have come up with a wonderful case that supports their position. People versus McDonald. People versus McDonald was handed down, I believe, the exact same week as People versus Roe, which I cited in mine. In Roe, they say, hey, you did the PBT in under 15 minutes. That's right out for probable cause, for trial, for all purposes. HGN done wrong, it's out, all this good sort of stuff. In a different panel of the Court of Appeals rules that same week the exact opposite. They say a bad or poorly performed HGN, an improperly conducted PBT. Yeah. We agree that the administrative rules were violated. We agree that this is inadmissible at trial. But we should look to the officer's experience and use the officer's experience to supplement probable cause. So in McDonald, they said the lower court was wrong to disregard the HGN and wrong to disregard the improperly conducted PBT, which is terrible, terrible, terrible law. Now, this is unpublished. It's unpublished, so it's not binding on this court. But here is what I was screaming as I read this decision. In Gilbert, I believe, which is one of our Daubert decisions here in Michigan, there's a line in there that says the proponent of the evidence bears the burden of proving admissibility and relevance. The proponent of the evidence has that burden. And they describe it in Gilbert as Hornbook law, citing Crawford, People versus Crawford. This is so rudimentary that the person who wants to rely upon an HGN test, or the person who wants to rely upon a PBT test, or in anything else, any other type of case, non-criminally, in the civil context, if you are the proponent of the evidence, it's Hornbook law that you have to establish as that proponent, both relevancy and admissibility. And if you can't do that, then it's out. How the Court of Appeals felt that this was, they stood Crawford and Gilbert right on its head and said the proponent of the evidence, being the prosecutor in this case, is good enough for government work. It's good enough because the prosecution's good, defense bad, is really the message I got from McDonald. Now, insofar as the published case law is concerned, we have People versus Berger. People versus Berger, in the underlying facts in that case, although it is not clear to the casual observer, if you go back and read it with a fine-tooth comb, knowing what we know about HGN now, we can say with almost a certainty that the eye test in Berger was actually done wrong. And it went up to the Court of Appeals with both the prosecution and the defense unaware as to how the test was actually supposed to be conducted. And that's why, it just kind of came in. Berger decides that they're going to do a review of the various cases from across the country, saying some states don't allow HGN in at all. Other states hold that it's scientific evidence and that the prosecution has the burden of proving that it's properly performed by a properly qualified officer. And yet another group of states hold that it's a field sobriety test, just like any other field sobriety test. They said, we're going to pick that one. Just arbitrarily, they decided we're going to go with the courts that hold that HGN is a scientific test and that the proponent, the prosecution, must prove that it was properly conducted by a properly qualified officer. through judicial notice. Accepting these scientific tests through judicial notice circumvents Dauber and 702 so far that it's crazy to think that they felt that they were in a position to just kind of pick and choose which way HGN would be admitted or denied across the state. I mean, this is judicial activism at its worst. But Berger, if the test is not properly conducted, and I mean, we're talking 4 passes versus 14 passes. At that point, it's no longer even an HGN test. We shouldn't call it an HGN test. It's just moving the finger a few times in front of a person's face. It's not magical. This is actual real science. And in order to have clues produced reliably through this, I mean, we're looking for 6 different clues. We have to actually look for those 6 different things. And as the NHTSA materials say, if you don't do it in a standardized prescribed fashion and use the standardized criteria to measure the result, you compromise the results. And they don't offer any flexibility with this in the training materials. So when I read McDonald, I thought to myself, you know, here's an officer who improperly conducted the HGN, improperly conducted the PBT, and the McDonald Court of Appeals panel felt that that was good enough because of the officer's experience. The officer's experience showed that he didn't know how to properly conduct the HGN. He didn't know how to properly conduct the PBT. How can we rely upon an officer's experience if they can't follow the simple instructions that they take in a 3-day training course? And when we talk about officer experience, all of a sudden I'm reminded of a line from 702 in Dauber. Knowledge, training, education, and experience. McDonald was basically accepting that the police officer was an expert witness without calling it that. This is deference to police officers that don't have expertise. They have training. And if the prosecution wanted to tender Officer Fidel as an expert, she could have, but she didn't. And normally, they don't try to tender them as experts because in Officer Fidel's own words, he's not an expert in this. He took the participant course. He graduated from the course. And then he improperly conducted the HGN. I'm a little bothered by the fact that he indicated that he doesn't know if he's certified to even administer the PBT, the Class 1 certification. I'll leave that to the court for whatever it's worth. But we have enough here to show that the HGN was done wrong, the PBT was done wrong. I'm asking that the court exclude those from probable cause analysis. And in the absence of those 2 tests, there is no evidence to support probable cause. There's not enough to say that it is more likely than not, or that a reasonable person would, reasonable caution, that sort, would say that there's enough evidence here for probable cause to arrest. So I'm asking that the court dismiss the case, suppress the chemical test after the arrest, ruling that the HGN and the PBT are inadmissible, even for probable cause purposes. And any other relief that you feel is appropriate, Judge. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Manarino.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, in this case, probable cause does exist for the arrest. Probable cause does exist for the chemical test and subsequent report. The officer testified that the probable cause that he had in this matter exceeded the clues that he had gathered from the HGN test and went beyond the PBT. There was the manner in which she was driving. There was the fact that she admitted to consuming alcohol. There was her performance on 2 of the tests that he administered. The probable cause burden is different than the beyond a reasonable doubt burden at trial, and the probable cause burden is significantly lower. In this case, we certainly have provided enough such that there was a probable cause for the arrest. And, you know, Mr. Mays argues without really offering any evidence that there was some issue with something that Ms. Clark had done within the 15 minutes preceding the test. There's no evidence of that. And I think that under the McDonald case, which I understand that defense is not a big fan of, under that, the officer can gather some information to form the basis for probable cause from that. We would ask that the court dismiss deny all 3 of defendant's motions.
Very briefly, Your Honor.
Absolutely.
My whole problem with this case is that when you look at this just as an average everyday person, we see no odor of intoxicants, no slurred speech, no bloodshot eyes, no watery eyes, none of that stuff. It's just not there. And then passing all these field sobriety tests aside from the HGN and PBT. And so looking at it just as a practical matter, I don't think we've got enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mays and Ms. Minorino. As indicated previously, the court did have the opportunity to review the motions, the three motions: defense motion to dismiss for unlawful stop and arrest, the motion to suppress HGN, the motion to strike HGN from totality review, and search warrant affidavit, and motion to suppress the PBT. The court will deny the defense motion to dismiss for unlawful stop and arrest, grant defense motion to suppress the HGN, and deny the defense motion to suppress the PBT. It's this court's position that Officer Fidel testified that his probable cause started with the manner in which Ms. Clark was driving and was added to or supplemented by her own admission that she had consumed alcoholic beverages prior to driving that evening. Mr. Mays, if you would submit an order with
I will.
consistent with that court's findings. As for the pretrial in this matter, which was also scheduled for today, is there any reason to have that conversation, or should we put this over to the court's next available date, either the 16th or the 2nd?
Yeah, I'm going to talk to Ms. Clark about taking it up on to circuit.
Absolutely.
So I would ask for a stay and give us a couple months to work this all out to see what maybe a status conference in 2 months.
I'm off of Van Buren next month. So if it's somebody,
I go to Judge Green next. And
I-
then the Ronald's one I just said, we got a date, right? Before we had it heard downtown, so.
I don't know where I was going was, I don't know that I necessarily wanted to be on Judge Green's docket, given today's rulings and Mr. Mays's suggestion that he'll be filing an appeal. I would rather keep the case. So I will grant Mr. Mays's request for a stay and set it for maybe 60 days out status. I'm turning and looking at you.
Very good, thank you.
Okay,
We'll provide a date later.
that's fine. Your Honor, I believe we do have a plea on the Johnson case, and then we have the other trial. Can I just get 2 minutes? to-
We have Johnson and Patterson, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
And then I gotta get some more.
Absolutely.
Judge, you off the record?
Not really.
I just wanted to apologize for this morning with that case. That was weird.
Don't apologize. It was very odd. I was curious.
I was shocked. If that wasn't patently obvious.